All right, ready? Sync clap. 1, 2, 3. You did it correctly. Yes. First time. This is going to be amazing. I'm so excited. What's going on, everybody? This is our new version of the pop culture recommendations. We used to do this on... That's kind of creepy, isn't it? We used to do this on our podcast, which is the Pop Culture Punks podcast, which you can find on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, YouTube, and Spotify. We decided it'd be kind of fun to jump into a new sphere and do some more video stuff. So now we're migrating what we used to do on the intro of every podcast into a video format where Phil and I will each take 2 items that we want to kind of pitch to each other to check out as our pop culture rec. We'll just kind of dive into what we really loved about it, some things that we think our Phil or I will like about it, and then what we think you should think about it and why you should go check it out. So today is our very first one ever, so we're super excited. This is new territory for us, kind of diving into video things. We're really excited how everything's looking and how that's all going. So thanks for tuning in, and so we'll just kind of go in from there. So do you want to start or do I?
You go for it.
You need to let me be what I'm meant to be. I'm not the one who dies. I'm the one who does the killing.
So I will give you $10 to guess what I'm picturing today.
Am I supposed to guess?
They're not guessing.
They're
guessing.
You guess.
You're guessing.
This is your job.
This is your job now.
I'm gonna guess Iron Man.
I should recommend that. No. Good guess though. That was a good guess.
Yeah,
that was a good guess.
That's a pretty good guess.
I finally sat down and I finished Punisher season 2, which
Did you? I still need to finish, but if you want to spoil stuff, that's fine.
I will not. So I want to keep it as spoiler free as possible, just because I know a lot of people who may want to watch it probably don't want the things ruined. But dude, I was kind of skeptical going into it, honestly, because I know from our previous discussion with season 1 when we talked kind of Punisher, Daredevil, and stuff like that, that I thought the season 1 was really good, and I love, dude, John Bernthal as the Punisher is incredible. Like, to me, he's the Tony Stark of Iron Man, or like Robert Downey as Iron Man.
I really hope they keep him on.
Yeah, he's all I can see now is Frank Castle. But so I loved John Bernthal as the Punisher. I loved what they did with the story and stuff. But I think there were some things that were lacking. Some of the story stuff that they did that I think was coming from a good place, but didn't quite land in terms of like it just felt like all these things were kind of coming up against itself, where it's like all of a sudden we're here and we're in this really deep, intense situation with this young soldier who's struggling with PTSD in season 1, and then all of a sudden we're over here and we're with these like corrupt military dudes, and all of a sudden we're with Frank, and then we're in the past, and there's just like too much.
Yeah. And
I think that was my biggest complaint with season 1 of The Punisher, as much as I loved it, was that there was just too much stuff going on. And I think what they absolutely nailed this season is they made the entire season just a more like contained narrative, and it focused on Billy Russo more. It focused on Madani, Kurt, this new girl who comes into the beginning in the very first episode, and Frank, and then I think like maybe one other person. But there was such and then there's this other character that's introduced as one of the key characters that interacts with Billy Russo. So it's kind of that crew of characters, and they're the ones who kind of drive the entire narrative. It wasn't like random people coming in and out, and like some people getting a lot of screen time and some not. I felt like everyone in the whole show got a really good amount of screen time. And one of my biggest complaints with season 1 too was that I had an on again off again distaste for Madani, where I was like, I really like how you could be, but how you are now just is very frustrating. And she became one of my favorite characters in season 2 with where they take her. It just felt like they let everyone in the show be like intelligent. It was very strange, like just how much they gave to like them actually making decisions that made sense. They were throwing them into situations that like were, I don't know, that they didn't quite throw them into in the first season, which I wanted more of. I wanted to see like how does Frank react to like more stuff, that him having to like protect someone now, because in the past it was just like, well, I'm just gonna go around shooting people, or like, I'm trying to help this guy who's like stuck in his basement essentially. And I feel like it ramped up at the end of season 1, right at the end, and it was just bombastic and crazy.
Yeah.
Whereas this, there were like slow moments in each of the scenes. Billy Russo in this season, frick, they did an amazing job with him as like one of the main antagonists.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite characters from what I saw.
Man, dude, that, and just his progression, his degradation into a like hardcore version of like the Jigsaw character from the Punisher stuff. And I'm not familiar enough with the comics to know how accurate it was, but at least in terms of his character and how they've set him up in the show and his journey, dude, it really pays off. It's just, I was so geeked. Like, I was even more mad that they canceled Punisher finishing season 2 than I was like, finding out midway. I was like, oh, well, I'll watch season 2. By the time it was done, I was like, frick, dude, I am pissed, because it was incredible. It was really good.
Finish it. I don't know why I stopped. I think part of it was I do not like Madani in this season at all. I think it...
How many episodes did you get into? I'm just curious.
Probably about halfway, I would say.
Okay.
It's not that I don't like her character, because I think she provides a good contrast to Frank's ideology and kind of like forces him to kind of question the line to which he'll take things, and it creates that good tension. But I just feel like her storyline ends up feeling contrived, especially with like the therapist and like all that stuff just feels weird to me. Like, it almost feels like there's two different shows, like a superhero show centered around like the Punisher and kind of his revenge tale in this narrative, and then some weird like government conspiracy TV show that are like both trying to be the same show in a sense. And I think in some places it works and some it doesn't. So maybe that's why I stopped watching it, but maybe I'll have to see it through and kind of...
So you were about like maybe halfway
I think
through the
so.
show?
I can't remember because it's been so long since I stopped. But
yeah, I think you still definitely get that feeling to a certain degree as you go in the beginning, because I kind of remember feeling that like, oh, here we go again. Madani doesn't want to be a part of this. But then some of the things that happen later in the later episodes, it shows a growth of character of like her, Kurt, Frank, like everyone around him, where it's like Frank is now infectious and like he's becoming a force of like, like he has a line where there's people coming after them, which I don't think is a spoiler, but there's people coming after him and this girl that he's protecting, and they're like, well, we'll get them and we'll arrest them and he's like, they don't care about your law. Like, there's the reason I do what I do, and the reason I do what I do is like, this works. Because they're going to keep coming after you until they literally physically are unable by, me murdering them. And Madani asks him straight up, and this is where I felt like the show finally started leaning into some of those questions it wasn't leaning into in season 1, because it was like, oh, Frank's like a weapon if you want him, but he's not when, he's a, vigilante when it's bad press. And I feel like what they did in this show is they wrote Madani to actually like lean into that question, because after that exchange, when he says these people, they don't care about your law, he says, she asks him like, well, what am I doing with this badge then? And he's just like, that's for you to answer. And by the end of the show, she actually does answer that question. So I think it's things like that where they stop kind of like tiptoeing around like, well, like she's kind of involved, and there's like other people that don't want to be involved with Frank's antics, but they actually, I think, let people react normally to some of these things, and like to a point where people change, and it was like, yes, like this is like what a show is supposed to do. People are supposed to evolve and change, and there is probably one of the most incredible defining moments of Frank Castle in this season 2 at the end, and like I almost cried, and it's specifically something that Frank does that I was like, oh no, like just narratively, like what happens and what ends up being the actual reality and stuff like that. It was like that moment alone was like, man, this is fantastic.
Interesting.
So super geeked on this season. So yeah, so I feel like the characters are stronger. I feel like the narrative overall was a little more consistent. There's still its ups and downs, and there's still its parts that
I think
are a
it
little
suffers
boring
from that Netflix bloat that these shows have suffered from.
Yes.
Like, there's just, you could get rid of probably like 3 episodes and still be fine.
I agree. But even then, I think that effect in season 2 of Punisher was much less significant than it was in, say, like season 2 of Daredevil or season 3, for crying out loud. Season 3 of Daredevil was just like, get on with it. Like, I get you're sad and like this is miserable, but that dragged on forever. And I felt like the show, the pacing almost felt more similar to season 1 of Daredevil, where it was constantly like, yes, there were slow moments, but those slow moments built into something.
Yeah.
Because I think that's the thing that people get confused. Well, excuse me. They don't necessarily get confused, but I think they get incorrectly upset at is slow moments are good and they should happen, but that slow moment should then pay off into something that is critical to what's going on. You know, like I think of like Attack on Titan. Like I always tell people you have to get past the first 5 episodes, but those are objectively like a slow burn. Like they take time. There really isn't seemingly a lot of payoff. But if you pay attention during that beginning part, we're at episode 53 come tomorrow, which is Sunday, you know, like the 19th, like that. 53 episodes later, those 5 episodes in the very beginning that were really slow are paying off in a momentous way. And so I think it's things like that where season 2 of The Punisher really capitalized on using those moments to push it forward or to like give it a payoff. And again, it's not perfect, but there are much less times in the show where I felt like, oh my freaking gosh, if you don't move on, I'm going to quit this show. Whereas like Daredevil season 3, like it was a slog. Like it literally felt like a slog.
I think for me with The Punisher, I think it's less of being bored by the slow moments. It's more basically I just want more Punisher and less of everything else. Mm-hmm. Like I want to see, it's almost like they're not utilizing his character to the full extent. Like we're not, it's kind of like the beginning of season 1 where it takes a while for him to kind of come into the character. But then once the show kicks off, it's just carnage till the end of the season.
Right.
Till you get to that just bloody climax.
Yeah.
Whereas with this one, they started off strong, but then they kind of pull back and they get into all the weird Madani and she's kind of using him for the stuff and Billy. And it kind of gets into this weird like relationship drama stuff.
Yeah.
That isn't inherently bad, but I think they're not utilizing it.
It probably gives you like I know where this is probably headed and I don't want to invest
they're
in
just
it.
not utilizing it in a way that like impacts me as well, because it's like I get it at this point. We get that Frank is conflicted,
right? And
we've seen that in Daredevil season 2. We've seen that in season 1. At this point, it's like I want to see like a full-on Frank the Tank just like mowing down these crazy. Like that's kind of the expectations for me. Yeah, and maybe that's wrong expectations, but
I think
it kind of feels like they're just rehashing the same horse every time.
Yeah.
Whereas I want the Frank that was at the end of season 1, just like a whole season of that almost.
Sure.
Just like
then
nuts.
I think you might be a little disappointed.
Yeah.
But I think for me, what I really enjoyed is seeing a different side of Frank Castle, because we all know that he's a killing machine, but I think it was almost like now he has to be responsible and not, I'm going to be a good person, but he has to think through more than just running in. And like, it's almost like he has evolved in the sense of like, I can't just run into all these places guns blazing. And there are scenes with that, and there are really awesome gunfights like that, but to the degree that they happen isn't as frequent, because now he's like taking care of like the character progression. He's having to take care of this girl and protect her, and so he can't just run around willy-nilly. And he has his friend Kurt, who like I freaking love Kurt. Kurt's like my favorite, and he plays a big role like later in the show and like how involved he is. And it's interesting to see like Frank being Frank and how people react to being around him. And so I think he almost it dove more into that case study of Frank Castle of like what is his effect on society and like what is his effect on the people around him.
Which makes sense. I think the problem is part of me doesn't want
right.
Frank
you want
Castle,
like gun-toting like
I don't want him to like learn
yeah.
and grow as a person, because part of his character is that he refuses to move the line in a sense. And I think in the comics they push that a lot more.
He definitely does not move the line. That's for sure.
I mean,
but
there is the one
crazy.
instance with like the photographer scene where he like doesn't kill that dude, where I think the comic book version would have just killed that dude outright and not let him live.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like part of me wants to see the guy who just has a line and he never like makes concessions regardless of what his friends.
I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting is that the only reason he doesn't pull the trigger is because she's there. That, the girl is there. And she's the one who then, as they walk out, is like, I didn't say you couldn't burn it down. Like even she's kind of got this like devil on her shoulder side the same way Frank does. And I think it's interesting. And there's so many payoffs of like, she like curbs Frank, but then she pulls her in another direction, and you like see them like interact and stuff. And so I don't know, I think it's worth a shot. I think if you're looking for an action-packed, gun-toting, end of season of the Punisher, I think you're going to be disappointed. But I think in terms of how they develop the characters and the quality of the show overall, they're never going to give us the Frank Castle action that we want. Like, I don't think they will.
Yeah.
At least, especially now because it's canceled. But I think in terms of having a very quality show that uses Frank Castle and the Punisher and the characters around him, I think this season was good overall at doing that. And I think it is entertaining. It's one of the best seasons of any of those Marvel hero shows, I would say, hands down. So
dope.
But yeah, so that's my pitch.
Cool.
Watch it, fool.
Watch it.
Tell
I will finish it.
Nice.
Once I finish Game of Thrones and Attack on Titan.
Now, obviously, I've dealt with this putz before, so I'll just do it again.
Hey, bud, what are you doing?
I can't do it when people are watching.
Get me the hell out of here!
Go for it. What you got? My
Popping
son?
off. I got
off.
so trying to think of which one to start with. I'll go with Detective Pikachu. I'm not sure
So
if
you did see it.
I did.
All
Saw
right.
it opening night. Evan and I went to see it.
Nice.
Yeah.
I forget that she's a pretty big Pokemon fan too.
Yeah.
She's gotten more into it.
The funny thing is she wasn't until
Sure.
I got her into Pokemon Go, and now she's like all in. Yeah.
It's a drug.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting much.
Sure.
I think like based on what I saw in the trailers, I knew that I would like it just
Yeah.
because it's Ryan Reynolds voicing Pikachu, which is like
Mm.
that alone. I was like, all right, I'm in. I'm sold. I think my biggest takeaway just overall was like this movie had no right to be as good as it was as far as like being the first live action Pokemon movie. Like
Interesting.
when like 3 years ago, if you would have told me they were going to make a live action Pokemon
With, like,
movie, I would have been
high-res
like,
graphics
okay,
and-
that's cool, but it's probably going to suck because
Yeah.
like how do you
Right.
do that justice in a way?
Yeah.
And I think
absolutely.
they were very smart to wrap this movie up in a different type of story and doing the Detective Pikachu story because like the world of Pokemon is just a backdrop to the story kind of rather than like the main focus of it as like I'm a trainer and I'm going to go fight gyms and kind of like the standard
Right.
Pokemon story.
Yeah.
So I think it benefited from that. I think overall it was a great movie. And
Really?
I think right now it's the highest rated video game movie.
I guess
so
we're
far.
gonna have to do a new episode then on
Yeah.
video game films. but
Yeah. So
Interesting.
yeah, it was good. I think the acting level was about what you'd expect from a Pokemon movie. Like
Right.
it wasn't stellar, but it wasn't terrible.
Yeah.
There was moments where I'm like, ooh, it's a little bit like it's not very good acting, but
Yeah.
I think you could tell that it was a little bit uncomfortable with like the CGI and like having to interact with.
Nothing.
I don't know if Ryan Reynolds was like standing there like with a suit on and they were doing the Pikachu. I don't
like
know.
crouched like
Yeah, yeah.
That's
So like
funny.
there were some moments where you could see it was kind of like this awkward whatever between the actor and whatever was going on with the Pokemon. But yeah, I loved like just getting to see all these Pokemon actually come to life on the screen was amazing. And like you get to see Mewtwo and just tons of Pokemon. And there's some epic scenes in there that happen with like Torterra and different things.
Nice. Yeah. So it's I was like, what's the word? Fan service.
Yeah, there was a lot of fan service. There's
Cool.
some pretty funny scenes with like there's like a club with like Loudrids are the speakers and they're like doing
nice.
dubstep like and their ears are like throbbing and stuff.
That's
It's just
cool.
hilarious.
That's it. So would you say like one of the charms was maybe how they utilized? Because I know there's like a couple shots from the trailers where like Jigglypuff is at like a bar and there's like a guy asleep on the table or
Yeah.
like there. It looks like there's like restaurants where like Ludicolo or whatever it is. There's call outs to fans of like, oh, if you know this Pokemon, it's kind of humorous to see them in this.
Yeah, I think
situation.
that was one of the most charming parts about the
Cool.
movie is like they utilized what you would expect like a world where Pokemon and humans coexist actually happen. And it's interesting because within the movie, like the city that they're in, Rhyme City it's called, like the guy specifically created a world where there's like no, like within the city there's no like trainers and Pokemon. It's like Pokemon and humans coexist alongside one another. So like,
interesting.
so like Pokemon actually work too, and so
Yeah.
like there's a Machamp like redirecting traffic and like basically a stoplight,
Sure.
and there's like a Snorlax plopped in the middle of an intersection as like a roundabout, and like it's kind of just like all these interesting like
cool.
world building techniques that they use
Yeah.
for Pokemon.
That's
that
awesome.
you wouldn't necessarily like think about, but it kind of like it makes the world feel a little more real in the movie, and I thought that was really cool. And I was just like stoked throughout the whole movie. Like, oh, that's like that's that Pokemon. That's that Pokemon. Like, and I couldn't remember what some of them were called because they use throughout. I think they go through all the gens. They like pick and choose from all the gens. But yeah, it's pretty good. I think the main story isn't like anything super deep or anything. It's about what you'd expect from like this kind of Pokemon movie.
Yeah, sure.
But there's some touching moments with like Pikachu, and like Pikachu was just so cute throughout the whole movie, and like the way that they got the facial expressions and stuff was just like astounding how they were able to get that. I don't know if they like motion tracked Ryan Reynolds' face and then put it onto Pikachu, but like it was just crazy what they were able to do and kind of like evoke this emotion from like a furry little mouse.
Yeah,
sort of. And it was just like so many moments that I was just like, oh man, this is such a cute movie.
Right.
And usually I'm not into like cutesy movies, but it was just like a combination of like a decent story, like awesome world building as far as Pokemon can be, and like the nostalgia factor of getting to see all these Pokemon be real. And it was just a pretty amazing experience. And Evan really liked it too. So it's always fun when Evan really likes something, and we can kind of share in that.
Yeah,
joy.
for sure.
It was pretty cool.
I'm curious because I have seen online that a lot of the critics were saying that if you're I remember seeing a lot of negative reviews, and then people were like, but I've never played Pokemon, like I have no idea what it is. And so if you were to review this movie or kind of anticipate what people would feel like in terms of like a general film, having no connection to the source material or like anything, do you think it's getting rated fairly as like a film in general, or do you think that it actually is maybe above average even as just a movie versus like a Pokemon movie?
I would argue that it is above average from a movie perspective. I think if you're not a Pokemon fan,
it's going to be kind of weird.
It's going to be hit or miss as far as whether you like it or not. I think the story is good enough in that sense, but after a certain point, you can kind of, at least I think I called the story before the movie even started, actually, because just based on the trailers. That was the one thing I would change that's the one thing I would recommend they change is like all of the moments in the trailers that are like the laugh out loud moments with Pikachu, like that was all the moments. Like basically every time that happened, I was like, hey, that was in the trailer. Hey, that was in the trailer. Like they kind of spoiled a lot of like the like funny moments.
Sure.
But yeah, I think if you're not a Pokemon fan, it might be a hard sell. It might be a hit or miss sort of thing. I don't think it's definitely not like a kid's movie. Like
that's what it sounded like. I heard someone describing it, and it was like they were saying I actually want to say it was Mega 64, so they're kind of ripping on it because like they're not huge fans of it.
Yeah.
But one of them was saying like they were genuinely surprised like how many times.
Oh, they get some like innuendos in there. Like
right,
you could tell Ryan Reynolds. I think he
He's
actually confirmed that like if they had enough footage to make like an R-rated cut, if they wanted to,
they would,
because he like just spent so many times making different jokes and doing different takes. And he said, like, if they ever wanted to, like, he has enough.
That's incredible.
Enough footage of him doing, like, inappropriate jokes that would fit. So, but yeah, there was definitely, like, innuendos and different things where, like, the adults would be like, ha ha ha.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Interesting.
It's hard to say because I'm very deeply entrenched in Pokemon nostalgia.
Right.
I think the story is good enough to appeal to enough people. Mm-hmm. And I think any kid would definitely enjoy this movie. It's got that flair to it.
Nice.
I would definitely recommend it for anybody, but if you're not a Pokemon fan, you might not get a lot of the stuff about why it's charming and different things.
That makes sense.
You'd just be like, what the heck are all these creepy monsters, sort of. So
sure.
I think from that perspective, it might be a hard sell, but yeah, I don't know. It was a pretty good movie.
Cool.
And there's a lot of just cute moments, and it's fun. It was a very charming movie. So,
definitely.
Yeah.
So I know we did, shout out to one of our episodes that we recorded for the podcast, which was like why video game movies are bad. So in that we talked about Assassin's Creed, Tomb Raider, and the Mario Bros. Movie. Where do you think this ranks amongst those three? Of all the other video game movies you've seen, where do you think this fits in the quality spectrum?
I think it deserves top spot.
Really?
Yeah.
Number one.
I think just because the story is actually consistent and it doesn't have because I know with like Tomb Raider and Assassin's Creed, like they had a lot of amazing moments, but then once they kind of get to the climax, it kind of falls flat a little bit for me.
So it was like consistent.
Yeah. Whereas this one, like it felt, even though like it was a pretty predictable story once you get to it, I mean, maybe that's just me being able to predict it, but I think throughout the story was consistent and it had the right level of like maturity but heartfelt moments and kind of like character growth and different things. So
yeah, do you think part of that too, just hearing how you described it, is also the fact that it sounds like they built a world. Like they didn't just. I think of like, I mean, it's rated the worst movie of all time, or one of the worst movies of all. But like the Mario Bros. Movie, the Mushroom Kingdom looks like a cyberpunk dystopian place with like dinosaurs and lizards walking around. So that almost like rips you out of it. Whereas like you said, there's like a Snorlax is a roundabout. There's, you know, different Pokemon who are actually in jobs where you're like, that's freaking awesome. Like that Pokemon would be doing that.
Yeah, I think so. I think just consistency. And I think for me, we didn't talk about it a lot in that episode, but I think Pokemon in general is the best example of being able to translate their medium to like all different types of mediums and be somewhat successful, like the anime and the show and different things like that. And I think this movie does the same thing. Like they're not trying to tell the same story as the video games are telling, like, evil bad guys trying to take over the world. And I mean,
the slowpoke
that's kind of the story of the movie, but it's not about like the same sorts of things. And I think because it was rooted in like the detective style story, it kind of lent itself to letting the world building breathe a little bit and just getting to kind of let that be the backdrop, but not the main focus of the movie. Like Pokemon battling wasn't the main focus of the movie. The focus of the movie was uncovering the mystery of whatever happens in the beginning.
Cool.
So I think because of that, it didn't suffer from the same pitfalls of like other video games movies just basically doing the same story, but in movie form that kind of just ends up feeling like a poor copy of what it's trying to be. And this felt like a more refreshing take on that sort of genre.
Cool.
But, yeah.
Awesome. I may have to go check that out. Find a Tuesday night on.
I'd recommend it if you're a fan of Pokemon. I think you'd enjoy it enough for $5 on the big screen. Like,
awesome.
And it's got like the city is kind of has like this Tokyo cyberpunky vibe to it, so it's like it just has a cool aesthetic.
Nice.
So,
I'm stoked.
Yeah.
Consider me
So
one over.
that. Yeah.
Nice.
Traveled and I've engaged with all these other artists. I've recognized the same thing in them was the same thing that was in me. And so it was really important for me to think about how to engage this creative culture, this creative community.
Cool.
All right.
What do you got?
My
for me?
second and final recommendation for this video. So I've been reading this book called Images and Idols by Thomas Terry and J. Ryan Lister. So Thomas Terry is also goes by Odd Thomas. He is one of the poets, rappers, artists behind Humble Beast and Odd Eulogy. Very, very talented writer. Very, very, very talented linguist. And so he and J. Ryan Lannister wrote, or J. Ryan Lister, not Lannister. J. Ryan Lister.
Game of Thrones.
Whoops. He and J. Ryan also wrote this book, and essentially what it is discussing like creativity from like a Christian worldview and stuff. And so obviously like coming from a Christian worldview, I loved it. But I think what was cool is I feel like sometimes it can be difficult being a creative as a Christian because it's like viewed as like this very weird thing. And just in the world in general, like I feel like creatives are put on a pedestal because they know how to make really awesome stuff. But like people who don't know how to make
weird
because you're also seen as weird, and then everyone gets to tell you that like your creation is bad and like what you made is bad and like you suck, and you know, I mean, for crying out loud, like what's happening with Game of Thrones and like all this stuff. And so I think what was cool about this book is just encouraging me as a creative coming from a specific worldview. And I think honestly, even for people who don't subscribe to the Christian worldview, I think some of the points they make are just like human points, and I think it's really cool that, and that's I think why I want to recommend it, is it's coming from a religious perspective. So if that's not your thing, like you're probably not going to like it. But I think the way it approaches it, it just calls out some of the things that we do as a culture to celebrate creatives so much that we like idolize them, and then, you know, we freak out when like they do bad stuff, or like we try to create, like towards the end of the book he uses this description of like Disney World and how like Disney World was Walt Disney's goal of like making the happiest place on earth. And his point is like, he's a dude, like, you know, and it's a broken place run by broken people. And so like, it will never perfectly be. And he uses some really funny examples because I've been to Disney World twice in my lifetime. And like, you know, he's like, there are going to be crying kids and someone's going to get sick and someone's going to get hurt and people are going to want to leave early. And like, he just kind of dives into, you know, we as creators have an ability to make things, but sometimes we use those things to create a reality for ourselves that isn't necessarily better or healthier. It's just something that we want to feel and experience because we have like a need inside ourselves to like feel we're important, to feel we're valued, and to meet all these needs via ourselves.
Yeah.
And so from that perspective, I think it was very humbling of realizing, like, just even looking at myself, like, man, there's a lot of stuff I even fall into in a mindset of a creator of like when I was like an amateur creator, very much, you know, I think of like my writing classes in college. I was so proud of myself just because I like wrote a story, you know, like it wasn't even good, but I was just so proud of it. And to the point where like, I don't think I was genuinely willing to receive criticism because for me, I had used my creative skills to like tell stories to basically make myself valuable or to make myself like different or to stand out. And like, that's just part of my personality is like, I want to be different than everybody else. And so, so I think just realizing like, man, that is not what I should be embracing about creativity. I should be about embracing creativity as, an expression of like the talents and the views and the ways that I've been gifted to see the world and to use that to like celebrate things, to challenge things, to question things, to look deeper into things, and to use that as an expression, you know, just of like how we've been designed. So I thought that was really cool. And last thing, and this is just kind of like, I can't remember what the exact quote was, but I think it was like, you know, hopefully most creatives, and like if you're coming as like a Christian, like creatives should be seeking to make everything for the world's good and for God's glory. And I think that first part was like really like hit me, because I think, you know, you and I have discussed many times about just struggling with pop music and some of the messages that our culture loves to preach, and just how much it's like, get money, get women, get cars, get this, get fun, get, you know, silence from all the craziness that's going, like there's always like an escape, and that's not every single thing, but you know, it's idolizing relationships, it's idolizing what things should be like. And I think some of the darkest songs I've ever heard have actually been the most enlightening to me. You know, I think of like you know, I've gone back to it because Tool's coming out with a new album this August, but like their album 10,000 Years and just some of the songs in there, like Vicarious and Right in Two, and just some of the challenges and like deep philosophical and theological stuff that Maynard James Keenan dives into, I think just really resonated of like why it's important to make things for the world's good. And I think those songs are, you know, they're coming from like a secular agnostic worldview, but what they say is really important, and it's really important, I think, for people to think about. And so I don't know, I think it was just like a cool perspective, and I know I gave you a copy of it, and I think you've read a little bit of it, but I'm curious.
It's funny because I think I read half of it. Is the same thing with The Punisher.
Sure.
So I'm about halfway caught up to you.
Cool.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. I think I like the idea of challenging assumptions about creativity, especially in like the Christian world, because I always felt like it was just like seen as like the weird side thing, like not a legitimate, almost like not a legitimate calling, quote unquote, sort of. And I think the book kind of taps into that a little bit. I think, again, towards the middle, it kind of dived more into like the theological and like sin and all that stuff ramifications, rather than kind of examining the role of the creative in kind of that sphere, which I thought it was what it was going to be. But I mean, that's just my fault for kind of assuming intent. Yeah. But I did really like it, and I think it is a good book in that sphere of like creativity and stuff, because it adds a different perspective, and creativity is such a complex topic in our culture, and like what even is creativity and entertainment and all that stuff. So
and I think just reading through it, and I mean, I guess this is just my natural inclination too, but I think it just made me think about, you know, other ways that other creators who don't subscribe to the same worldview are challenging thought, and I think that was kind of like, oh, that's kind of cool. But you know, like there's this whole section about how creatives can create themselves to be like gods in the eyes of other people, and how like we make gods out of ourselves with like what we make, and like because we're making stuff, and that's how we've been designed, is to make stuff. And there's a song by Travis Scott called Stop Trying to Be God, and I think it's interesting because there are a lot of people of like, oh, is this like Illuminati or things in that, and there's a lot of people that pointed out that there's been, you know, a large number of pop artists and hip hop artists who have been like, you know, God is this, I'm God. You know, Kanye, for crying out loud, is always like, you know, I'm God, I'm, you know, Jesus, like that's his whole shtick. And so I think it's interesting to see like correlations between other creators who also are kind of wrestling with those same questions, and like, you know, I've been gifted with these things to do this, and like what's the purpose. And
I think with creativity especially, if you're not in the right mindset, like you said in college, I think it's easy to elevate yourself and think like, because I am creating and writing, I'm better than everybody else because like I've manifested this thing in a sense. And it's easy to, I could see like somebody in Kanye's position where like you're just so popular and so famous and like people just praise you and love your music that like it's easy to kind of elevate yourself. And I know he also deals with like bipolar and doesn't take his pills and stuff like that. So it's kind of like it's the levels. It's but I think creativity, like a lot of the times, like pop stars, like that's either their downfall or their success is like people's praise of them. And that's why you see, even just like within movies, I was reading an article about Keanu Reeves and how like chill of a dude he is in real life.
I freaking
and, like,
love Keanu Reeves.
He's so like down to earth and like
he's awesome.
Doesn't have a lot of like paparazzi following him around just because like he's so like chill and doesn't ascribe to the like the celebrity lifestyle and kind of it's kind of interesting. I'm more interested in people like that who are kind of like see creativity as a way of expressing sort of like
a lot of trauma,
the human condition.
And,
absolutely. Yeah, like John Wick is kind of parallel to his own experience. Not the assassin part, but like the grief that his character feels in the movies is very parallel. And I'm always drawn to people who use creativity as a way of like expressing like real emotions and kind of tapping into that thing. Yeah. And that's not to say like somebody like Kanye can't do that either, because I like a lot of his music. But it's just interesting seeing different personalities kind of elevate or de-elevate themselves based on their perception of how important they are in the public eye.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things. And like you said, like, I think that would be my one complaint about this book is it does get very, very dense in theology, which I think when I go back and read it, because I want to read it again because it's fairly short. It's only, it's like under 200 pages or something. But
it's pretty thin.
Yeah, but I think there were sections where I was like kind of nodding off and I was reading because I was like just like, this is it's like this is thick, like it is dense material. But I think there were those little nuggets that popped up of like, you know, make things for the world's good. Like I think for me, like that's why I'm so excited to create stuff and talk about stuff and celebrate stuff, is because, you know, I think creativity does have a huge ability to, like, you know, think of how many movies have changed people's perspectives on things, or think of like music that has revolutionized culture and like even just different genres and styles that have, you know, been created. You know, like the history of hip hop was from like oppression and stuff like that. And so seeing how things like that can become a tool for people without a voice to create a voice and to do it in a way that resonates with everybody and gets people who probably wouldn't have listened earlier to now listen and to watch and to see. And so I think it was cool. So yeah, if you're not coming from a religious worldview, it's probably going to seem dense and like over the top and like, wow, whatever. But if you are, or if you're just interested in creativity in general, I think it's a very interesting read to just kind of see and like at least grapple with the idea of like why are we creative, and like what's the importance of us as human beings all being creative to a certain extent, not necessarily in how we execute our creativity, but at least the source and, you know, and just our ability to. So yeah,
definitely
nice.
Hey, all my dad's outlaw country bands, he'd play me when I was young, 'cause they'd lie through their teeth about the lives they lead when all I wanted were honest songs. But now the anthems in the van and we're screaming them out on the hall.
What you got?
So I got, I think I don't know when this is coming out, but a while ago an album was released called, now I'm blanking on what it's called.
I have it, Routine Maintenance.
Yeah,
by
Routine
Aaron
Maintenance.
West and the Roaring Twenties.
By Aaron West and the Roaring Twenties. And it's fantastic. It's like, I mean, I would describe it as folk punk. It's kind of like it's been my thing lately, but the thing that I personally love about it and why I would recommend it is the story behind it, because basically, so he's got this most recent album and then his first album, which is called We Don't Have Each Other, and then an EP that he released after that called Bittersweet, and then a single called Orchard Park. And so with this one, it's kind of culminating the story that he's been telling, and it's the lead singer of a pop punk band called Aaron West, it's the lead singer of a pop punk band called The Wonder Years, which was
I think I've heard of them.
I was a huge fan of them during my like college Warped Tour days, and I still love listening to them. It's angsty pop punk,
nice,
kind of like the pinnacle of that era of pop punk. And he started this side project because he had a lot of stories that he wanted to tell that he that weren't necessarily applicable. And so he kind of crafted this fake personality called Aaron West, because his name is Dan Campbell. And so he created this fake character called Aaron West and basically like wrote this whole story about his life. And kind of the first album was about like the worst year of his life, where like this, I think, so basically his dad dies and that causes him to kind of become distant with his wife. And so him and his wife kind of have this tension. And so they try and have a kid to kind of bring some sort of light into their life. And then they lose the kid. And so like they basically get divorced, and then the album is kind of him processing that. The fascinating thing about that album is none of that actually happened to him. And so like all of these emotions you're feeling throughout the album is just like, I can't believe this is just fake, and like it's just a story. And it kind of like rekindled my love for storytelling and songwriting. And so that was the first album. The album that he just released, kind of like, I think it's been 5 years since he released that one. And so that one kind of wraps up this story in a sense, and it's kind of him. It's called Routine Maintenance because it's kind of a metaphor of like working on yourself and kind of realizing like the person you've been is kind of crappy towards other people, and kind of learning to like do things for other people as a way of kind of refinding that hope or meaning in life in a sense. And it's just like, I think I listened to the album like 6 times in a row at work that day. And like I was tearing up at my desk for like a fictional character that like doesn't exist. And like you can hear like the desperation and the hope and like the joy in his voice in these songs. And it's just like insane. It like amazes me how he's able to do this. And like there's a song about like him and his wife finally signing the papers. And it's just like this really desperate song about like he's come to terms with the fact that they're like getting divorced, but it's also like he doesn't want the last memory of her to be like them sitting at this table signing these divorce papers. And it's like, it's weird thinking about it because in real life, this dude just got married and isn't having a kid, but somehow he's able to like conjure up these emotions and write this like really
almost
heartfelt song about the antithesis of what he's actually experiencing. And then it just like culminates into this whole story about like him and his sister and kind of rekindling his relationship with his family and her kid, and like her losing her husband and stuff, and kind of basically like bringing the cycle back around and learning that he has to be more than he has been. And it's just the thing I love most about it is the ability to tell this really intensely depressing, in a sense, story, but also like be able to convey that just through songs. It's just amazing.
Wow.
So
dude, I'm gonna have to check that out. I also don't want to start bawling at my desk though, so
so maybe don't listen to it at work. I think it's, I don't know if you'll like it because it's folk punk, so it's like
dude, I was joking. So I was checking and I found I went and listened to Songbook by Frank Turner this past week. I freaking loved it, man.
Did you?
Like it's fun. It's fun. I think as I've grown older, I've been more willing to listen to different genres. I think I will never, like, I still can't do pop. Like, that's the one genre. I cannot.
I've even gotten into country, but I still can't get into pop.
Yeah, but I think I just appreciate like the creativity of songs. Like, I think the opening song in that album.
Which one is the opener on that one?
Oh, I don't know. I'll look it up. But I think 4 Simple Words.
Oh, dude. When it kicks in,
and it's just it's like just how
that one is bonkers live.
I just can't imagine how fun that song would be. So I think just experiencing Songbook by Frank Turner and just hearing like if this is also like folk punk, I could just imagine how emotional just that all the details in the story. And I mean, you know, End Seekers or Children of Fire, I think it is, and The Son of the Morning are still 2 of my favorite albums of all time by O Sleeper, just in general. It's in both those are O Sleeper, which I also recommend. So Children of Fire and Son of the Morning. Which stuff. Are just incredible narratives and like some of the songs in there, and even just hearing Shane Bly, who now is frontman for Woven War and stuff, and just like what he describes about him and Micah Kennard, who like Micah who's a Christian, him being an atheist, and like them writing these songs were like, I think there's like one, it's like Means to Believe in Children of Fire. Like just the passion in that song is incredible, because it's basically, they wrote it as Shane Bly writing to God, and then Micah as the screamer, like his answer to Shane Bly's questions. And so that was how they wrote the whole song. And you can just, man, so if that will get me going, I don't know what like a full-on narrative like this from start to finish will do.
it's pretty awesome. And it took me a long time to kind of really piece together what is happening in the songs because the way he weaves the narrative is very intricate. But once you like get it, you're just like, man, this is like it's really well crafted. I'm surprised what he's able to do, and it inspires me to want to do more folk punk stuff with Isaac. So
dope.
Yeah,
dude, I'm so jazzed. Yeah, I'll have to check that out. So cool.
Check it out.
Check it out. That's it, right? As the last one?
Yep, that's the last one.
Cool. We'll just shout out one more reminder. Thanks for tuning in to our very first episode of the Pop Culture Punks Pop Culture Rex. It's a lot of pop culture and
Pop culture.
You can check out our podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, YouTube, and Spotify. We are on Twitter and Instagram at I am Phil Sorensen and at JK in Pop Culture. Those will be on the screen. What else should we shout out?
Subscribe.
Hit
the subscribe button and hit the like button and leave a comment down below. Let us know what you've been into.
Yes.
TV shows, movies.
Maybe we'll check it out. Maybe we'll do a video on it. And maybe we'll
won't.
never touch it. Maybe.
Only if it's good.
Only if it's good. Only if we deem it good. But yeah, definitely check those out. And what else can we shout out? Also, videos. So not only will we be doing this now, you can watch what we're going to start doing. And we'll have 2 episodes up by the time this one comes out of Rage 2. So Philip and I sat down and played Rage 2 on the Xbox.
Yep.
This
and we're trying to get into the YouTube space a little bit. So we're testing out different video ideas. So
yes.
Again, be sure to subscribe so you can
and let us
catch
know.
all that
let
stuff.
us know what you like.
Yeah.
So thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next one. And until then, we bid you a fond cowabunga.
In defense of honesty, I'm gonna burn out in a brilliant burning flame. No, I will not be stifled by the dry rot or the haze. I'm not giving up, I just don't have the time to waste all my days rewriting all these lies. I'm not giving up, I just don't have the time to spend another moment living someone else's life.